going to begin, and we will go along. So thank you all for joining us today for what we're anticipating to be an informative and valuable presentation filled with substantive information for everybody's practice. We have a great group here today, a good mixture of attorneys, service providers, foster parents. So thank you all for being here. And we also have some excellent presenters. Before we begin, I'd be remiss to not thank the Office of the Public Defender for co-hosting the training with us today. And as you may already know, the Center for Children's Advocacy, we are a nonprofit law firm. We represent and advocate for children and youth who are most at risk. Our staff is located in community sites throughout Connecticut, including hospitals and schools. And our work brings us into courts, as well as child welfare and juvenile justice facilities. So before we begin, just a few logistical matters. Right, I should introduce myself first. So I just got a note about that. So my name is Stacy Schleif, and I'm a staff attorney at the center in our child welfare advocacy project. That's a big logistical matter. Other matters include that you all should stay muted, but please put any questions that you have in the chat. We'll continue to monitor that. We will save time for them at the end, but we'll likely be able to have other time throughout the presentation where we can sneak other questions in, especially as they relate to the individual person presenting. So again, please don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat throughout the presentation. Additionally, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website, which is www.cca-ct.org. So onto the feature presentation. Hopefully you all are joining us today because as you may be aware by now, earlier this year, DCF has updated its policies surrounding adolescent and transition age youth, which they're calling the VITAL model. More about what that stands for to come. And these new DCF guidelines were created with the collaboration of DCF involved youth, and they're intended to better serve youth and young adults as they transition out of DCF care. Before we get to some of those highlights, I wanted to introduce today's speakers, and we'll then put into context why these policies are important and why our work with older foster youth in general is so essential. So our three speakers today, who I promise are out there somewhere, even though I can't see them, so we have Jenny Pokempner. She will be our first speaker. She is a policy director at the Youth Law Center, which is based out of California, although she herself is located in Philly. And in her role, Jenny works on child welfare and juvenile justice issues. Prior to joining Youth Law Center, Jenny worked at the Juvenile Law Center.
Sorry, I forgot I had this stupid thing on.
And played a large role there in state and national reform work as it related to older youth in foster care, with specific areas of focus on older youth permanency, extended foster care, eliminating group care, and improving educational and employment outcomes and opportunities. So we're very lucky to have her with us today. Thankful to be able to do this virtually so she can pipe in from Philadelphia. Latosha Johnson is also with us today. She is a program director at DCF with their Transitional Supports and Success Division. She's been in that role since shortly before the pandemic began. And in addition to doing that, she manages some contracted service provision for the department, their federal funding, and policy and practice work of their adolescent and young adult work. She's been with the department over 18 years in various capacities. So we are as well very lucky to have her with us today. And Latosha, I hope you're out there somewhere as well. And then our third speaker, and I should say they'll all be piping in as they can. We're hoping to keep this as a more conversational presentation here. But our third speaker is Joanne Knight. She's a TSEA specialist with CHR, which stands for, I believe, Community Health Resources, but correct me if I'm wrong. She works directly with youth, doing anything from helping them figure out bus schedules to driving them to appointments, to helping them set up bank accounts and direct deposit. So I know she's worked with at least 2 of the youth that I also work with, and I can't say enough about the guidance and the hands-on assistance that she's provided, really been invaluable for them. So we are very fortunate to have her here today to let us know, how some of the groundwork with this youth goes and what we can expect for the youth that we work with. So, all right, so next slide, that covers today's speakers, and just we'll move on to Jenny shortly. I just wanted to put this in the bigger context of why we are having this training today. As you may know, there's federal legislation enacted this past December 2020, putting into place a moratorium for the duration of the pandemic, which prevented foster youth over the age of 18 from discharging from care, regardless of their age or their compliance with services. It also provided for easier reentry for those youth who had been discharged prior to the moratorium going into effect. Unfortunately, that moratorium ended last month on September 30th, although I think we're keeping some hope alive that similar legislation will be eventually reenacted. Regardless, I should point out that Connecticut had been one of, if not the first state to implement its own moratorium on discharging older foster youth during the pandemic, dating back to March of 2020, so maybe 9 months before the federal moratorium. And that was without any sort of need for a lawsuit or legislation. So they should certainly get props for doing that. And since that time, since the pandemic began, throughout the pandemic, the department has implemented some significant policy change. And that's what we'll be getting to shortly. I do want
Julianne, thank you for having the time to meet with us. I love.
So our as you can see on the screen now, the objectives of our webinar today, and they include identifying issues of transition age youth and how to respond to them. I know all of us who work with youth, are familiar with those in some respect or another. We hope to provide advocacy tips for engaging with and assisting transition age youth to meet their goals. Definitely we provide a rundown of the, highlighting changes to the new DCF adolescent policies, as well as highlighting other programs that are available to the youth that we work with. So hopefully that sets the stage for what you have in store. I will turn now to Jenny to get us started with, putting a lot of this in context for us in the national perspective. So move to that, and hopefully, Jenny, are you out there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. And thanks so much, Stacy. And thanks everyone for letting me join you all in this event. Sorry, I can't be in Connecticut, but really excited to be with you all today. And with really excellent co-presenters. So as Stacy said, what we're trying to do today, I think I speak for my co-presenters, is that the message really is that your role as an advocate as you make the transition to adulthood can be extremely powerful.
Ilsa, I'm not going to take up this.
If people can make sure they're on mute, that would be great. Thank you. But we totally understand. Zoom, we were talking about how Zoom always, each time we come back, even though we've done it for 1.5 years, is always fun. but our message really today is that you all can be such powerful advocates and play such an important role as youth transition to adulthood. But we do want to share with you today a lot of information to say your role is powerful and we need you to play that role, but you're not alone. There's a lot of really great laws and policies. Stacy just mentioned a couple. I know Joanne's gonna, and I'm sorry, Latosha's gonna fill us in on changes that are really exciting in Connecticut. But there's also a lot of federal law that can be really powerful tools for us as advocates. There are, as I said, a lot of great resources and programs that we want to share with you. And you also do have a community of advocates across the country that are really focusing on this issue both in and out of court. And so today what I hope to do in this intro is share some background both on kind of the data and the perspective of what the transition to adulthood looks like with respect to foster care across the country, and how that impacts some of those learnings and insights impact your advocacy. Share some lessons from the pandemic, and many, were interested to hear kind of what you've learned and how it's changed maybe your advocacy, and then end with a couple of advocacy tips. And I'm going to throw in, as Stacy mentioned, the moratorium and some of the Chafee flexibilities did end on September 30th, but there are still a couple of things that their states have flexibility to do, and we still are working on federal legislation, which is not enough in the sense of we wish it hadn't lapsed, and I think that's a big kind of failure on the part of Congress, and but we still are hopeful that there might be some changes by the end of this year. But I'll give you kind of a little glimpse into that at the very end. Next slide. And just so everyone knows, you will get the slideshow. So within the slideshow, there's data and there'll be citations to studies and things. So don't worry about having to take those notes. You'll get the slides, but also a bunch of links if you want to read things in more detail. And again, this slide really does show things that you're probably aware of, but the number of transition age youth, and that's generally defined as kind of 16 through mid-20s. For most states, we're talking about through 21, but the transition to adulthood lasting into mid-20s. But in terms of transition age youth in foster care nationally, it is about 170,000. And then the percentage of our child welfare population, that's about 25%, which means this is a big chunk of young people. And so often they do get lost kind of in the shuffle. And I know, Connecticut is among the states that has put more of a kind of self-conscious and targeted focus on those young people. But they are a group that really deserves a lot of attention. We have seen growth across the country in building support. So now we do have about 45 states that have some form of extended foster care. So foster care past 18. You guys are a state that were probably in the lead well before we had fostering connections, and have really, pushed in terms of being, I think, among the most progressive states, probably alongside California in terms of your policies. So that's definitely excellent. I know we all feel like in our states, there's always more to be done, but it is good to have that perspective. That Connecticut, I think, is among the leaders. We still, though, do have states that haven't opted into federally funded extended foster care, but most states at least provide some support past 18, but there is a lot of inconsistency in terms of programming. So some of the things that I think Latosha is going to talk about how you guys have said, let's look at extended foster care, and let's just not make it 3 more years. Let's make it really, as constructive, supportive, and age appropriate as possible. You guys, again, are leading in that, but a lot of states, including mine, I would say, are still struggling. And so I think we've seen a lot of growth in extended foster care and the coverage of the country, but we still, I think, have a lot of work to make it really optimal for young people. And those last 2 bullets on the slides kind of reveal what we've been dealing with for years, which is that we still have so many youth aging out to non-permanency, meaning not leaving to reunification or adoption or guardianship. And we know how much that puts them at risk for some of those poor outcomes that we're seeing. So again, this is just a quick kind of data snapshot, some good news, but still some real challenges that we have to deal with across the country. But again, excited to hear that I think Connecticut is really trying to address a lot of these issues. Next slide. And then this is stuff I know all of you know, and I just want to say a little something about this. And I know that Latosha and Joanne will talk about this in some ways as well. I think it is important as advocates for us to remember kind of what the transition to adulthood is. And again, for many of you all who might have children, and I'm guessing a lot of you do, or have kids who have gone through this age of transition, late teens, mid 20s, I think it is really important to remember kind of what that's like, both in terms of like the brain development and what that means in terms of behavior. And then layer on to that the trauma that young people, many of us work with, have been through, and how that impacts how young people are going to be interacting with you, how they're going to be processing kind of what you're telling them, how they're going to be setting goals. And so I'm not an adolescent development specialist, and I will provide a bunch of citations for things that I think are great for attorneys to read in particular about what this means for your advocacy. But I think kind of the bottom line for attorneys, and I don't mean to simplify it too much, is that this is a time of great development where young people are experiencing things, they are taking risks, and they need us to create the support system and the environment for them to be able to grow, including taking risks and learning things safely, and not feel consequences that young people shouldn't. So being able to support them both in making the room for really great opportunities, whether it be employment, whether it be education, whether it be spending time with friends, developing relationships with family, but also being an advocate for them when they do things that we know young people, it's natural for them to do. Stay out past curfew, even experiment with things like drugs, that we need to be supportive, and that kind of putting the adolescent development in that context for us in our advocacy, I think is really important. And I think it also can lead us to think about creative ways both to interact with young people, but to think about what our advocacy means. Next slide. It's also really important, and I know like I do this a lot as someone who works with older youth. As youth get older, I really start to focus on what are things going to be like when they're on their own. And I start to focus just on housing, just on employment, just on education. And I think the lessons we've learned, and they've been exaggerated in the pandemic, is that young people need family and supportive connections to make this transition. And this slide is just showing you some of, it's hard to quantify in a lot of ways how family support is important to young people as they grow up. But researchers have quantified like some of the financial impact and what most young people rely on, both in terms of money, but also time. And so just wanted to flag that, because I do think it is really important to kind of really be focusing on as attorneys, like as our clients get older, we shouldn't lose track of permanency, because if we do and just focus on things like housing, employment, and schooling, we are going to leave youth really in bad spots when they hit kind of those road bumps, or those situations where they really do need support. And you having a plan for housing won't change that they don't have someone to rely on. So just wanted to flag some of those issues. Next slide. And then, you know, this is just a little bit more on family. And I think, again, for me, during the pandemic and working with young people, the number of young people who just really said they did not have anyone outside of the system to rely on. I don't know that I was surprised, but it really was very dramatic. And again, when we think about what young people need as they're making the transition for that consistency and support as they experiment, as they make mistakes, as they look towards defining their future, having those supportive adults, and not just biological family, chosen family support network are so important. Next slide. And then again, what this means for you all is really, you know, you don't have to be an expert in adolescent development and the transition to adulthood, but knowing what some of the basics of what young people need in terms of the milestones they need to reach, and how their behavior might be really how you might see that behavior and how other people, including the judges that they're working with, their social workers, that you can be a great supporter and ambassador in terms of really helping people understand what this transition looks like when it is bumpy, and it will be bumpy, but you can also be someone who helps make an opportunity possible, supports a young person as they're trying to figure things out, remove barriers as a young person makes progress. And again, that is really hard and challenging. Again, many of you who have young people of this age know that it's really challenging, but as a lawyer, you can really help with a lot of this navigation. Next slide. And on this slide, I have a couple of the things that, again, won't probably be new to you. There were a lot of polls that were done throughout the pandemic of young people who were in foster care and how they experienced the pandemic. And just wanted to highlight this, and I have the link because there are about, I think, 5 or 6 polls and surveys that were done, is that young people were hit really hard. And as Stacy said, the Supporting Foster Youth and Families Through the Pandemic Act was passed at the end of December 2020, but a lot of our states really had challenges with implementing it, slow implementation, and then, as Stacy mentioned, the moratorium did end. So want to flag that the challenges, again, that young people, I think, always hit as they're making the transition to adulthood or aging out of foster care were really exacerbated. And we're really going to have to be mindful that the road kind of back to stability, to whatever kind of our new normal is, young people really were, I think, hit among the hardest. And while I think Connecticut's done a great job in trying to respond, I still think we have to keep this in mind as we're working with young people and supporting them going forward. Next slide. And again, some of the tips I think we get, and I'm really interested to hear both your lessons from the pandemic and if and how it's changing how you're working with older youth. To me, it really was hit home that if we are not focusing on permanency, we are really leaving youth with so much less of a safety net and support. And so starting that as early as possible, but if it has fallen off the radar and you're working with a youth and they're 16 or 17 or even 18, put it back on. It's not too late, but it's just so important. And I think a lot of us, and I admit to it myself as someone who really works with older youth, we just can't lose track of that. I do also think that we've really been realizing that transition planning and just connecting youth, not just with child welfare services, but other support services and services to address trauma is something that we always have to be doing. And we have to be kind of more proactive. And I'm going to share a couple of resources that we've been using that are available to you guys as well. But I know that Latosha and Joanne will highlight those things as well. And then again, just early planning as early as possible. We really are waiting too late, and young people really experience kind of the negatives when we don't prompt them in that way. Next slide. I'm going to move just to a couple tips, and I hope, and I'm pretty sure that Latosha and Joanne, I think Joanne in particular, are going to be really helpful in talking more about this. I do think, again, these are pandemic lessons, but lessons that and tips that I think really were hit home during the pandemic, but really apply all the time, and are lessons that I think young people really reinforce with me about just how we're communicating with young people, is that we really should be, as attorneys and other supporters on the call, checking in often. And again, as you guys know, with your teenagers and young adults, you need to do that, and they might or probably will tell you they don't want you to, but you still should. And I think, again, I'm interested to see what Latosha and Joanne say. A lot of young people do acknowledge that they do want us reaching out. And want us to be that person or people that do that. And that the more opportunities we allow for communication, the more opportunities we have for them to share things, both about what they're worried about, as well as kind of what they hope and dream for. And we also have to be communicating in the ways that they prefer, not the ways that we prefer. And that really means asking them those questions and maybe, learning more about tech and really taking advantage of these different formats that a lot of us have gotten better at, or at least we're familiar with during the pandemic, but it is so, so important. And again, as attorneys, I know we're not all attorneys on the call, and we work with youth in different contexts, is really when we're interacting, talking not just about the case and their interest. They do, particularly as they're adolescents and young adults, as they're developing their interest in figuring out things about their careers, just about who they are and what they want to do. They do want us to ask these questions, not just about, is anything wrong, but what's right? What are they thinking about? What are they interested in? And then a thing that I'm really interested in talking with other people about, I know we don't have as much time today, is I do hear a lot of attorneys that are working with older youth really tell me, particularly in issues like permanency and other things, I just listen to what my client says. And if they say this, that's what I go with. And I do think that's totally important. And I am a huge advocate for expressed wishes, representation. But one of the things I think we really need to do when we think of counseling, particularly with adolescents and young adults, is be counselors and questioners and engagers. So for example, for permanency and other issues, a young person who's really resistant to that or has had bad experiences, doing that, what a lot of, I think, trainers call unpacking the no, asking why do you feel that way? You deserve permanency. I know you may not be interested in it right now, but let's talk about that. So just wanted to flag that, but that's a topic I'd love to talk to more people about. And then this last bullet, I know you know, but don't take things personally. Young people need us to keep moving forward, even when they act as teens and young adults do, which sometimes can be a little challenging. Next slide. Another tip is just, again, what you guys are doing, and I know, but just wanting to flag, because I know for Connecticut and other states, sometimes, the representation, there's some time limits and also limits in terms of like the scope of what you can do, but really important to advocate for access to all the legal child welfare benefits that young people are eligible for. And happy to talk more about these, but the ones that really jump out are extended foster care, CHAFE services, including aftercare, education and training vouchers, Medicaid for former foster youth, and the housing benefits, FYI, and FUP. And your advocacy in making sure they get these services is really, really important. Next slide. And then this is really important for the pandemic, but also after. There are a lot of pandemic specific benefits that youth with experience in foster care are eligible for. And I put these on the slide, and I know I'm going quickly because I want to keep to my time. I have some resources for everyone to learn more about this, but a lot of times we don't understand as advocates that our young people in foster care are eligible for a lot of things that are like non-child welfare benefits, whether it's something like the child tax credit because they're parenting youth, or the stimulus payments. And we sometimes have this feeling of they're only eligible for child welfare things and not these other things. And particularly now where we do have that these federal programs in terms of the moratorium and some of the CHAFE flexibilities have lapsed. These are really, really important. And you as an advocate, you don't need to know about all of these things, but what you do need to know is that they exist and know that your client may be eligible. I'm happy to help people navigate this, but this is the kind of thing of like knowing what's out there and then being the connector for young people. Next slide. And then another tip is just something, again, I think you all do this, but what we do see across the country, but I do think definitely, and Latosha and Joanne can speak to this, that Connecticut is pretty strong in this. But one of the things that we have seen across the country is this obligation that we have in federal law to not discharge youth if there's not a good transition plan. We don't see it enforced in many states. And again, I think Connecticut is pretty good on this and definitely appreciate you guys as an example, but we do often have to really work with advocates just to let them know, like, you as the attorney, you should be opposing discharges if there's not a plan. You have these guarantees, but they do need to be enforced. They don't kind of just implement on their own. And I'm happy to help and share if people have questions about how to do that. Next slide. And then just a quick federal update. As Stacy mentioned, the Division X of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was the moratorium on aging out and the CHAFE flexibilities, did end on September 30th. all the states have until September 30, 2022, though, to spend their Chafee increase, which means you all will have you have until September 30th of next year to spend it. And because you have Chafee eligibility to age 23, that does mean you can use your Chafee increase if you still have that money remaining to provide supports, even housing supports for youth as they're aging out. So that's just something to be aware of, even though the kind of key provisions did lapse on September 30th, there still is that next year that you have for those increased Chafee supports. We are still working on trying to get the moratorium and the Chafee flexibilities back in place and possibly some additional money. Definitely keep people updated. There gained some traction right near the end, right before September 30th, but we're not able to convince congressional leaders to put that in. So that really was disappointing, and I think, like I said, a real failure of Congress, but we're still pushing for that. But I'll definitely keep everyone up to speed, and Stacy to share with everyone. Things you can do is talk to your congressional leaders, your representatives, and your 2 senators about that you want to see these provisions back in place. But I'll definitely share any advocacy tools if anyone on the call would like to be part of that advocacy.
Jenny, if I could just interrupt real quick.
Yes. Yep.
I just see a little something in the chat.
Sure.
I'm guessing it might be a question to maybe quickly define the Chafee services increase.
Sure.
Or what.
Definitely. No, and great question. Thanks, Barbara. So in the Consolidated Appropriations Act, the Chafee funds are federal child welfare funds that all states get, that child welfare agencies then use to support youth as they're transitioning to adulthood. I'm sure Latosha and Joanne can tell more about exactly what Connecticut uses those funds for, but across the country, it's things like, it can be housing supports, it can be life skills classes, it can be a real array of things. It can be financial assistance that the Child Welfare Agency can use. And Division X of the Consolidated Appropriations Act allocated $400 million to all states. So Connecticut got its chunk of the $400 million, and many states use that money to do things like provide direct financial assistance, like kind of a stimulus style check. Some states did increase their housing programs because that was one of the biggest issues for young people during the pandemic. So that's what that increases. And ETV is education and training vouchers. That's another part of the Chafee program that provides normally up to $5,000 for youth for higher education and training. This Consolidated Appropriations Act added a little bit to education training vouchers and allowed states, if they wanted to give youth more than that $5,000 up to $12,000 if they had sufficient funds to do so. Thanks for those questions. I try not to use acronyms, but I do fall back into that, so apologies. So I wanted to pause, I guess, actually, do you mind just doing one more slide so I can just let people know what resources that we'll be sharing? The couple of resources, if you want kind of the landscape of, some of the latest data on transition age youth, both in terms of outcomes, which is raw numbers, there's a data summary. Also have a summary of federal laws impacting older youth. So kind of that runs the gamut from Chafee, but also to things like APLA and other permanency requirements. The TSEA Pandemic Funds Maximization Grid, sorry for that really bad name, but basically it's a grid that goes through all, probably not all, but the most relevant benefits and programs that were put in place during the pandemic that might be useful for transition age youth, and just goes through what they are and how you can find out more about them and how they could be helpful for transition age youth. So the slide where I said like there's a lot of pandemic funds like emergency rental assistance, that's not just for transition age youth. You've probably heard about that on the news or in your work. It's for all potentially eligible individuals. But wanting to highlight a program like that to say, if you have a youth who's aging out and their biggest issue is housing, the emergency rental assistance program in your jurisdiction, they may be eligible for that. So this grid just helps you kind of look through the benefits and try to figure out where they are. For example, like where in Connecticut you would be able to identify a program, whether it's through the state or through your more your local jurisdiction. And then you have a list of practice tips. We, like you all, do a lot of work with young people. California Youth Connections is one of the youth-led organizations that my organization, Youth Law Center, works a lot with. And they put together some tips in collaboration with us just about kind of interacting with young people as clients. So those are the couple of resources I wanted to share, and happy after the session to go into more detail and answer any questions. And thank you, Latosha. You're right. Another acronym that I use today, transition age youth. I'm so sorry, guys. It's just so hard to not use all the acronyms. But yes, please call them out when I do.
No, you're good. Sometimes you go to a DCF meeting and it's like 10 in a row, and I think you stuck to 3 or 4, so you're good.
All right.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that was really informative. And I can't believe, I mean, personally, that 367 hours, that figure that you gave, that youth, that's per year that youth normally rely on family for, or adolescents rely on family for. Yeah,
well, and I would guess that many of you who maybe have college age students or students in high school are thinking, oh my God, it's like 4 times that. So, I mean, the hours we spend with our kids, particularly at the time and even after they've left the home, I mean, I think, you know, it's always hard when we've had that and taken it for granted to conceptualize it. But gosh, it's a huge number and it's so important. And we're not saying that attorneys, we're not asking you to be a parent. We're asking you to acknowledge that they need those connections, and can you help with prioritizing those things and really making sure that they're kind of at the top of the list. I know there's a lot of things at the top of the list, but that's, I think, among kind of the highest.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel like the longer I do this work, the more I realize that this age group is, you know, how many things can come up, you know, there's just so many. But at any rate, we'll shift now to Latosha Johnson, unless Joanne or you, Latosha, want to respond to what Jenny has to say, or maybe just jump right into what DCF here is doing. I think that would be great.
Sure, Stacy. I think it's a great pivot. So good afternoon, everyone. And I appreciate the opportunity to come before you that was extended by the Center for Children's Advocacy, and sharing the space with all of you advocates in some way, shape, or form, and my colleagues on the panel. I definitely, I'm one of those that takes the opportunity and personal liberty when people like to say great things about us, that I will echo again. Did you hear what Jennifer said? That we in Connecticut are leading, and sometimes that's not often shared throughout Connecticut. There, you know, we tend to highlight a lot of the things that we don't do, and sometimes there's occasions where that is pointed out. But we have to celebrate our wins and our successes, because our successes really are the successes for our young people. And so and that's shared success across collaboration, as you'll hear our commissioner say, and others within the agency, that we are the child welfare agency, not the child welfare system. And so there are many players that are intricately involved in making sure that our young people do well. But can we improve? We absolutely can, which is why we spent a good amount of time. And I thank you, Jennifer, for giving the extensive background, and I don't have to now, on a lot of the needs associated with our young adults, right? And that if we can look back on ourselves, and I'm not years old, and I know what I needed as I came through young adulthood into adulthood, into my early, to late 20s, that I think who I wanted to be and who I thought I was at 15 and 16 definitely isn't who I shaped to be, and that is ever molding. And I think we have to give grace to our young people in that process to be able to mold and to struggle, to fail forward, to and to have what we call a way of falling back also. And so I am very cognizant that at my established age, that I can also fall back on some folks if I needed to. And in this pandemic, if anything, that's taught us that there's been a highlighted multiple pandemics within the pandemic, and that some of us were not as privileged to have the opportunity to fall back or fall forward with individuals. And so we look at our young people and recognize. So I will also take a liberty that we, the Department of Children and Families decided to not allow young people to exit very early in the pandemic. We did it before the Fed started, before it was popular. And so it was, a thought to say like, hey, we're experiencing a real problem here, and we can't just say, you all, we're going to transition you. And so back in April of 2020, we executed out a decision and strategized that we would keep. Now, some of our young people were not as thrilled to remain with us, but we had to coach through the fact that we didn't know where things were going to land. Some of us thought this was going to be a couple of months, and here we are, some almost 18, 19 months later. And now, as Jennifer has shared, that we are, working through transitions. And so say that. So here at the Department of Children and Families, I will say prior to the pandemic, there was a thoughts and feedback from our provider community, but moreover our youth, our young people. And so in the capacities of which they sit, shared how they felt they needed to have more voice, that they felt that they needed to have more influence as to things that related to them. And so I always liken this as, as someone who has grown up. I do not have children, so I mother in other ways. And so recognizing that at times, I've come up through the ranks. Some of you probably have, as your parents have said, this is what you're going to do. And this is what you're going to do because I said you're going to do it, and because I ... right? And because I said so, or, or those type of, directives, right? And that worked for a certain generation, right? And that's okay. But we have to evolve as we evolve as a people, and our young people evolve. I was not in the age, and I'm assuming the people on the squares as well, we're not in the age where our young people, where you were a young person that grew up in social media. I still heard the dial-up of the AOL, the little in the connection and stuff like that, right? And so like if we've evolved in these technical pieces of life, right? Of, I now can go to the ATM to get money. I don't have to write a check. That we have to also evolve in our thinking and allow the folks with the lived experience to share their opinion. And however they share it, know that it's coming from a genuine place. Our kids are real and they'll tell it like it is. But also to say like, hey, like, I know that I have to experience this, but like, can you share it with me? Why? And sometimes we got hung up in the questioning, right? The why, and why are you asking us this? And then we had to sit back and say, these things are impacting them, right? I get to go home and when I make decisions or I make recommendations or the like, and the same with you all, that we get to walk away. Maybe we feel and we carry that a little bit, but at the end result, what I say or what happens within the agency has a tremendous impact on young people. And they don't get to walk away from that. They get to have to experience it. They get to have to live it, and they got to, deal with it. Right. And so if I had to get to deal with and all of that, I should have a say in that process, right? And at least if I have some sound examples of why I don't agree or why I agree, I should be able to have a seat at the table. I should also be able to head the table at times and share that power and partnership. So I think that's where we have switched for our work, is that we have a tendency to say we share power, but verbally say we share power. It's kind of like, saying that we are doing anti-racist work, but saying it, but not really doing it, right? We need to be very cognizant that if we say it, we need to be able to say how we're executing and delivering that, right? And so in this particular space, it was things that our young people were bringing to us were not difficult stuff, right? They, like, well, why can't, I help get an extended, stay and care, why can't we, or one that was, fabulous to me was, do you know that like electricity went up? Now, we all experienced that last year when, if you were a part of certain providers, that you saw your supply charge and your delivery charge like 3 times, 4 times the amount of the bill, right? And so here we're giving, stipend to a certain allotment that hasn't changed in over a decade, right? But income has changed, right? And bills have changed, the prices have changed. And so some of these things that young people brought to us was not, not for, just for the heck of it. It was really intentional, thoughtful, and deliberate about, hey, we need a system change. And so we got tired of saying, like, they got tired of waiting for us. And then pretty soon they started pushing that. And so we said, you know what, it's time that we listen. It's time that we listen to the young people with the lived experience. We also know that it's a shift. So as I highlight some of the components of our policy that has taken almost about the time of the pandemic in the making to be able to we recognize that this document that we produced is a working document, right? And so that although it's met with the best intentions, some things fall through and some things we didn't account for. So we also, again, my greatest pitch that I say through this that I've learned in the pandemic is grace, that we allow for grace for the errors and the things that we didn't think about, that we go back to revisit and plan accordingly. And so over the past 18 months, and that is inclusive of feedback from different stakeholders. So our young people are stakeholders, providers are stakeholders, and internal staff are stakeholders. And so what we came up with, which is vital, so what Stacy shared with you is an acronym, but it's not an acronym, it's an approach. And so, it is vital, and it stands for voice and choice. That's the V for vital. The I is innovative. The T is thorough and accountable. The A is authentic youth engagement. And the L is life launch. That's the foundation of the policy and practice approach here at the Department of Children and Families that launched effective August 8th, 2021. And so I just want to preface that date in mind, because also our staff are also learning this new work along with you all. So again, that grace. And so why vital? We felt that combination of the approach, and notice I didn't say a model, because it's not a model. We're not testing and theorizing. What we're saying is that the research is already out there to message for us and for us to embrace that when we partner with young people, we can produce better outcomes. When we are working for real, not in name, but in collaboration with our young people, that we are successful. It's not met without challenges. It is not unmet without struggles, but to recognize that in order for us to be able to be a better servants for our young people, we have to be able to embrace the authenticity of engagement. And that looks different. And so a lot of our focus at the foundation for our educational aspects of this work is going to be engagement, and not just for our workers, but for the agency. And so there has been a different approach to, we used to, if you were familiar, we had this training series that was adolescents and it was targeted. You got a certification and then go forth and be an adolescent worker. So we wanted to make sure folks understood that this is a value set as well, right? No different than fatherhood engagement, no different than, incorporating anti-racist practices. This has to be very deliberate across the agency so that folks that come into touch with young people, whether they're in an investigation, in home, in different capacities, when they pick up the phone as the clerical, that they understand the nuances of why this is so important. And so some of the crucial components of our vital is that young adults are gained more progressive control over their planning. That is really the heart and the crux of that. It is not to say that we will not agree. And I want that to be of emphasis, because sometimes we get caught and our language is very evolving, right? And so you'll notice as you grow with us that we don't talk about discharging, because that's not what we do. We are going to be transitioning. And as you heard, the transitional age youth, that moving from one point in time to another point in time is the focus. We're not trying to say, because when you become a young adult, you don't just stop growing, right? Like, you're transitioning, and it's another phase of growth and development for yourself. And so what we want to do is make sure that their case plans, that the work that they want to do is done in collaboration, where they're leading it and asking for support on how to get this done, right? So I want to do this, so how do I get this done? Another fundamental crux of this practice approach is the fact that we want folks to have tailored approaches for our young people, that it's not cookie cutter. Everybody's not going to go to college. Everybody's not going to go to vocational, and some people might need to work, but that there's variance in individuals, just like there's variance in us, that I may want to go to school, and it might have sounded great today, and I thought I wanted to be a child psychologist, and that is not where I am today. And so knowing that we have to be very clear that our decisions change, and that's okay too. And that we bring them along in that process, meaning us as the staff, in that, like, that didn't work out for me, and that's okay. And how do I get to the next, let me, identify the next plan for myself, but not wanting to say that we have a view of, and if you're familiar, we used to have this phrase that you have two bites of, and the attorneys probably heard of this, and some of the advocates that are on that, you got two bites. And I don't know what two bites constructed, but, and then we don't know who came up with two bites. Like, it's like the what do you call it? The Loch Ness Monster. Everybody's seen it, but nobody knows who, where, you've never seen anybody really with it. So we couldn't find who determined this, and how did we determine this, this number, arbitrary two bites, to say then that means you get no longer support. What we said was, let's talk about how we support you in your planning and the efforts to do that, and how we equip you in getting where you are, and through that process. It's not enabling, it's called supporting. It's called encouraging. It's called advocating, right? And again, changing the language, getting away from compliance, getting away from consequence, to partnership, to accountability. Nobody is saying that we're not expecting young people to be accountable, but we are saying that accountability works both ways. It works on us as an entity that's providing the provision, and it works on them as the entity that's receiving the support and the provision. We want to hear from youth with lived experiences in all aspects of our work. So it's not just for the young adult work, right? We have placed young people at our Office of Community Relations. If you're not familiar, it used to be known as the Ombudsman's Office, but they're the Office of Community Relations. We have young people who are working in the Academy for Workforce Development, that work on the different trainings for our workforce and their influence in that. We have partnerships with, with outside providers and that they're connected to. And so what we definitely noticed was that across states, and I'm gonna say across states in Connecticut, with providers in and outside the system, that we ask young people to do a lot for free. and like, oh, their lived experience. Come talk to us, come, share your experience and your, enlighten us on, and that experience should be compensated. And so what we decided to do in October was increase our stipend for what we call the Youth Advisory Board. So anything that we engage our young people in their voice to advocate, or their voice to sit at the table, their voice of their time, that they are now given $15 an hour for that time, and we encourage others to do the same. And so if you're in space with me and you ask me, I want a young person to do, you're going to hear, so what are you paying them? That's going to be the next, commentary. And so, in order for them to want to be, to have buy-in and agency with us or with you, we have to feel that they have to feel that they're valued, not just in name, but actually in action and deed. And so that's some of that. With, I think there was some, talk about the Chafee, and I wanted to jump to the Chafee before I forget, right? And that we have federal funding, as Jennifer shared, that in some of the allotments of our federal, we have what we call regular Chafee, and these COVID monies that came as a result of the pandemic. And so I'll speak very briefly about the regular monies. And so our regular monies support everything that Jennifer says, but also in addition, that Connecticut has chosen to do is also work with providers that are doing work with our young people to get them to produce better outcomes. That would be like life skills, that would be, financial literacy, and things of that nature. And that encompasses what we feel are the toolboxes of success that we've noticed. That isn't just about the education, but it's also primarily about what are they leaving us with? Do they got a bank account? Do they got a driver's license? Do they got these things that they need that are tangible skills, soft or hard, that they walk away from? So that's one component of the Chafee money. The COVID monies, as Jennifer said, was we strategically, if your young people hadn't told you, between the month of May and September, we gave out stimulus dollars to our kids who are over the age of 18. I hate the word stimulus because it really is. So we called it youth and care. So it was called the youth and care support. And because I just thought there's so much negative connotation from the outside with respect to the stimulus, and some people got it, some people didn't, whatever. So we just said, this is how we're going to support our young people. And for me, you will hear from me that language matters. So I'm deliberate about how I speak about young people. I'm deliberate about not saying foster kids, or you'll hear transitional age youth, young people in foster care. But because this is not who they are, this is an aspect of what they're participating in. So in any event, that money, we also set up emergency funding. We earmarked some for the community, that we partnered with the connections, so that our young people that maybe they were with us, that they transitioned on, but then had some struggles, that they can contact the connections and actually, receive the pandemic support through 2022, September, as Jennifer noted, or until we spend up all the money. And quite honestly, I'm just like, I'm making it rain everywhere. So just make sure your people are getting in on that, because there's not much that we're saying that we're denying as far as support. Again, those monies that we did earmark for the connection for kids that were with us at some point in time, over the age of, I believe, 14, that they can go ahead and contact them for support and until September 2022, or till those funds are exhausted. That includes rent. That includes security deposit, food, utility payments. So that's the a portion of funds that same support. We also utilize for our young people as transitioning. So some of the young folks that left us or transitioned from us in September, at the end of September, or are making their way through now, have received funds to support them through the transition. So we gave some funding for an additional 3 months to be able to support them through that transition period for us. And so part of this, again, in the policy, and also for the with respect to the COVID dollars, I don't want to forget this, that we also have what do you call it? No, I did that. That's it for the COVID money. So I spoke with respect to that. That ETV That is not, I just want to say it's within the department. It's not under my personal purview, but our educational training funds vouchers are with our post-secondary ed team that's under the education division. So just for clarity that they house that and those supports. And we just partnered with a provider outside to be able to assist with provision for folks that are not with us, right? So some of the struggle was that we had this money that we can support kids that had left transition from us, but didn't really have a connection to do that with, unless they were with us. So now we created, partnerships that folks don't need to rely on DCF to get support, but that we are supporting the community in partnership with like Family First type of manners of partnering with the community to help our kids that are now in the community, so that we don't have to have a return pipeline unless we're needed as the fail safe. So part of that policy also, guys, that we have, and I'm trying to be conscious of time because there's a lot. One, I will say to you that I gave Stacy the link to our Vital video, that we did a very robust presentation from soup to nuts on our policy that is on our DCF website under the teen section. They haven't quite fixed that part but when you get to the site, it says Transitional Supports and Success Division. Under that has everything listed as to what's going on with our adolescent and young adults work. And so our practice, our policy is 28-1. So if you're looking for the policy, it is there, and it's attached to a practice guide called 28-1. I would thoroughly recommend not just looking at the policy, but looking at the practice approach. We give very detailed conversation about and documentation on how we approach authentic youth engagement, how we approach positive youth development, how we have summit meetings that will be coming through for those that are transitioning, so that young people lead these meetings and be able to talk about what the plan is for their transition, how we are looking to change how we do case planning with young people, in particular now that we're excited that we're kind of coming out of a consent decree. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility to have not this child in placement. All of you who are attorneys, you've seen the child in placement plan for a 20-year-old. Nobody wants to see child when they're 20 years old. They want to know that they have. So we have this Omega assessment that we'll be working with our young people that they will lead to talk about the things that we don't talk about, such as that we haven't in the past. Financial literacy. Do you have a bank account? How can we get you your driver's license? What are the barriers to that? Those tangible things. And then, yes, the schooling and the education and stuff. And so to go back to those 2 bites, again, we're giving folks the opportunity to engage in planning individually. It may take youth X 4 years to get out of college, graduate and get a degree and be fine. And so they should not have to stay just for staying. They did what they needed to do and got their degree and got a job and they're doing well. Or the person that got a job straight out of, high school and working and got benefits, and then these are spectrums. But then you're going to have young people who are struggling. And so the point would be to make sure that we have the flexibility to say, okay, this didn't work. Let's try this. And what do you think about this? Or what do you think you need to be successful? What do you think? What are we missing? And those collaborations and partnerships. So I think Stacy sent me something, share the re-entering process. So our young people have the ability, our policy, we stretch to 23. And I'm going to be honest that one, we wanted to be in line with the feds, because we get federal money that supports our young people through 23. And I wanted to make sure that I'm clear on that. Jennifer, the proposing of the extension of moratorium for 27, right? But that at this right now, we're not there. So I want to make sure that folks are cognizant if they hear from me and ask, like, I thought you guys can support young people to 27. That was for the purposes of that pandemic. And right now the guidelines have reverted back to the federal, the previous federal guidelines of supporting through 23. And if it changes, then we'll roll with the change. But for purposes of our policy, we extended through 23 because we get federal support, and we want to be able to mirror that level of care and support. What we did acknowledge, and I have no qualms about mistakes, because that happens at times, is that we also did not address our statutes that indicated that we only support children through 21. So now these are the things where you all can come into supporting as far as advocates, is that as we propose legislation to support that change, that you will be on board and there and advocating and contacting all the folks that you need to contact to be able to support that. But in the interim, what we do is make exceptions. So we can make exceptions to those. So we do that on case by case. So right now we're held to what the statute has indicated, and then we make exceptions as we get them. So I hope that clarifies. But reentry is an opportunity for young people to return, because guess what? Sometimes people think they need to get out here and experience the world and life, and then realize that it ain't what it is. And if I could re-enter back to my mom and dad's, I probably would right now. But they're not accepting. but we have allowed young people to come back to get the support that they need through through the reentry process. They contact the care line, and then they're screened. And we've minimized from our previous policy all of the barriers that were put in place, not intentionally to put up barriers. I think the intent was to help young people get support, but not recognizing that if I'm homeless or couch surfing, that I'm not going to be able to get substance abuse treatment. I'm not going to be able to get mental health treatment. So what we decided to do was waive all of those, take them all out of the policy, and just say if the person meets the under 21 criteria, that they can come back into to care to get the supports that they need. Unless we identify, because sometimes our young people also tell us that they don't really want the case management, that they need is housing. And then that's why we have our partnerships with the Connections and with the Norwalk Housing Authority to be able to work in tandem with them to maintain people in the community where possible. And so I know this a lot. And so unfortunately, it's not the large scope of what, there's a lot of missing pieces that, and I can go on and on about the policy, but I do want to just preference by the fact that, again, that this is new to our staff. And as it is, they're working through some of the changes and some of the philosophies. And as I will always say that whenever we're changing values or philosophical, that there's an adjustment, and everybody's at different stages, whether they're, on, the vacationer to the prisoner to the, I'm embracing fully. We have to, work with folks to bring them along, but we're confident that with this approach that folks will embrace and move with us. And so I will pivot to Joanne, because I know that we are running short on time.
Thank you so much, Latosha. It was really helpful to hear, philosophically where the department is at, and we look forward to seeing that trickle down as the months wear on. We'll move over to Joanne now to, inform us of some of the on the ground work going on, what it's like, what TSEA does, as well as comparable services. I don't know if TSEA, is that just in the Hartford area? I know it's called different things. Yeah.
Yep. So thank you, Stacy. Thank you, everyone. Thus far, a lot of things that you guys have mentioned tie right into what we do at CHR within our TSEA program. I've been working with TSEA for the past over a year, actually. Actually came into the program during the middle of the pandemic. So it's been a different experience thus far. So TSEA stands for Transitional Support for Emerging Adults. So just as Latosha mentioned, transitioning, that's one of the most important things about this program. So what we'll do is we'll review the importance of the program, a brief history. We'll talk about engagement strategies, enrollment requirements, and the enrollment process for TSEA. So also, so what makes TSEA LifeSet program a program that you want to you want your young person to enroll in? So TSEA was created for youth to give them an opportunity to enroll into a program where they have a voice. So a lot of programs that are mandated for them to do, they it's mandated. So TSEA is special in the way that it is voluntary. And they're able to work with the specialists to make their own goals and to be in control of their life, and to have guidance through the process. Next slide, please. Yep. So we do have two providers. Thank you. So we have, I know that we have our program at CHR, and we also have a program at Wheeler Clinic. Yep. So we actually have two regions, and Wheeler has one region. Thank you, Latosha. All right, so program, a little bit about our, I'm going to kind of skip over certain parts, but because of time, but a grant for TSEA started, sorry, for the LifeSet program started in '99. And then TSEA came to Connecticut about a couple years ago, so it's pretty new to Connecticut. They've been doing this for quite some time. We're lucky to actually have the program. The program is designed to help youth between the ages of 17 and 22 who are making a transition out of state custody, a juvenile justice system, or otherwise opportunity youth to an independent life. So TSEA has a systematic approach that incorporates multiple aspects of the youth's natural ecology. So that includes their community, family, their peers, schools, in addition to personal characteristics. The model was developed in 2009, and they've been constantly doing research and revisions and evaluations on the program to ensure that it has model reviews. So thus far, since 1999, there's been over 18,000 young people who have received help through services and LifeSet services. Next slide, please. All right, so some of the areas that TSEA assists with include education. So we support youth with successfully completing high school. We provide career counseling, college enrollment, and transitional skills. Also with housing, we help them with increasing their housing acquisition skills, how to complete housing applications, apartment maintenance skills, assistance with case management via the chair contract, which is required in order to be eligible for chair through DCF. Also with employment, we help with resume, creating the resume, updating the resume, cover letters, helping them with getting to jobs, applying to jobs. So anything within the employment realm we help with. For life skills, all those wonderful things that Latosha mentioned, budgeting, cooking, home management, finding community resources, a lot of these things we help with. Also with health, how to get health insurance, making sure that they're on top of their appointments, making sure that they are aware of what a healthy sexual relationship looks like. Anything that can come up, we can assist them with in that area. And one of the big ones is document attainment, right? Our young people, a lot of them when they come to the program, lost their birth certificates, their social security cards. They don't know how to do it. We teach them so that it's a skill that they have, so that they don't have to panic when they lose it, right? So that they'll have that knowledge already and be able to attain those documents and understand the importance of securing said documents. We also talk about healthy relationships, making sure that that permanency is there, making sure that we create a support grid so that they know who they can reach out to when they need assistance or if they need somebody to talk to. We do complete the permanency pack with them. We do the support grid, as I mentioned. So that is one of the most important things. A lot of our youth don't have those conversations with with their supports to find out what supports are feasible. So we actually go through a list of things and then sit down one-on-one with their supports and sign like this contract to like, hey, you'll be my lifetime support, and these are the things that I'm agreeing to like help you with. Legally, it's not binding, but it's just, you know. All right, next slide, please. So some of the model elements of our program, on average, our program is from 7 to 9 months. Due to the pandemic, we did have to extend it. So we actually went over a year for a lot of our youth on our caseloads. We have to meet youth at least once a week, face to face, wherever the youth is comfortable. So whether it's in their house, at a Starbucks, outside, we have like lawn chairs, we can go to the park, whatever works for them. We also have our office too, that if it's close enough, we can go there. And we also have our 24/7 on-call services. So if a youth needs any assistance or if there's like some kind of emergency, they can contact one of the TSEA staff, and then we'll be able to, we're on like a rotation. So like they'll always be able to get a staff member. And we have each specialist has about 8 to 10 youth on their caseloads. So they're able to have that one-on-one time and connection with them. And our program, so we have consultants that we work with, and the consultants ensure that best practices are taken for each youth. And we also create an individualized service plan. We make sure that the interventions are best practices, that if there's anything that they think that would be helpful, they'll suggest that. We have this great online portal that has a bunch of resources for our young people. So it's very like highly structured, and they're constantly reviewing it for fidelity. And we do have like reviews so we have reviews during the program, at the end of the program, and at 6, 12, and 24 months, just to see a success of youth who actually complete the program and ensure that we're constantly trying to make any revisions to continue having success. Next slide, please. So some of the philosophies and principles of the program. So having a systematic assessment, ensuring that a safety plan is in place, education, vocation, maximizing our outcomes with our youth, that is youth driven, having a comprehensive support network. So we like to collaborate with a team for that youth, whether it's their therapist, their DCF social worker, their foster parents, anybody that's in their life, that we want to make sure that we're all on the same team, and intensity of engagement. So making sure that they're constantly engaged. Next slide, please. So service components of the program. We do complete a pre-enrollment assessment to assess for suitability for the program. And we also complete an initial and comprehensive psychosocial assessment. Upon completion of those, once they're approved for the program and it completes those 2 assessments, then they're ready to actually start working on their goals. As mentioned, service plans, we create them and they're reviewed monthly. So we keep track of exactly what interventions and goals were completed and making sure that we stay on track of all those goals and interventions. All right, next. Thank you. And everything that we do, it's based off evidence-based practices. So we make sure that we incorporate CBT, MI. We also have sexual health modules. We assess for lists, and we also work a lot with the PIA for life skills. Next, please. So this program was actually one of the first, yes, and my motivation interview. So this is actually one of the first programs that had a huge study, a sample size for a study to prove the effectiveness. So they actually had a control study to see the effects of TSEA services, and the results were like awesome. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the study results, that there was an impact on mental health. So mental health problems decreased by 13%, violent relationships decreased by 30%, employment increased by 17%, homelessness decreased by 22%, hardship and lack of food and resources down by 13%, and increase in earnings by 7%. Next, please. They also track the outcomes after discharge. And here are some of the outcomes. So 85% of youth at discharge, they were living at home or independently. 3% were in foster care, 1% in residential treatment, and 6% they lost contact of. But that 85% is pretty high. And 93% of our youth were actually satisfied with services. A lot of our youth don't want to exit the program, so that's usually the issue. So that's a good problem to have. Next slide, please. And then they actually did another survey at our 1-year discharge anniversary. And 91% were living with family, 88% were in school, graduated, or employed, and 87% had no trouble with the law. Next, please. So some of the locations, so I know some of the locations, you guys were inquiring about the location. So Connecticut is one of them. We have Seattle, Washington, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, New York, Louisiana, DC. And then our consultants, the people that oversee the program are in Georgia, Mass, Mississippi, Tennessee. So my particular consultant that I meet with weekly is in Tennessee, and Oregon. So this program is pretty much everywhere. Not everywhere, but getting close to it. All right, collaboration history. You can go to the next one. Next slide, please. Yep. So as I was mentioning with the partnership with CHR and Wheeler with of LifeSet, so region 3, 4, and 6. So we can actually go to the next slide. Roles and responsibilities. Next. So staff roles. So my role is to provide direct services to the youth. Also to provide services to at least 8 to 10 young people at a time. So making sure that we try to keep our enrollment up. So this is the part where I'm saying, if you have any young people, please put in your referrals, talk to the your DCF supervisor to see if your young person would be a great fit for the program. And we have to at least see them at least once a week, face to face. During the pandemic, we were seeing them virtually, which of course, was a struggle for a lot of them. But thankfully by August, we started actually doing more face to face. Mention that. All right, next, please. Next, the referral and enrollment process. So the referral process is that steps are the DCF social worker identifies the emerging adult that could benefit from the services. The social worker completes the referral form and sends it to the designated gatekeeper or their supervisor. And the gatekeeper sends it to the referral, sends the referral to TSEA provider, and then TSEA specialist is assigned to the referral. And that's when they complete the pre-enrollment assessment to see if they're a good fit. And then if they're a good fit and there are no issues, then they're enrolled into the program. Next program, engagement. So Engagement. So with engagement, some very important engagement strategies would be find a way to barrier reduce, right? So barrier reduction. So for me, I've had youth who had issues with transportation to a job. So I'm like, hey, I can transport you to a job, whether they need bus tokens, whether they need supports in certain things. Maybe they didn't get their money for their books in time and they're short on one of their textbooks. TSA can help with getting said textbooks. So different things that we can do. We do have funding for certain levels of support. So we try to minimize barriers as much as we can. And we realize that causes, that results in a lot of success in our youth. Yep. Consistently reminding them about their scheduled appointments, meeting our youth where they are. So making sure that we utilize text as a form of communication, because a lot of our young people, they communicate through text. Attempting to work around their schedules as much as we can, and gain a better sense of their generation. A lot of times our youth say, you guys don't understand our generation. So just trying to really understand who they are, why they're the way they are, and just trying to just be more open to understanding them as young people, because we both do things differently. Sending them text messages, wishing them a happy birthday. I'm checking in occasionally, just making sure that they follow up on any homework assignments that you give them, or to remind them of upcoming appointments. Next. So some signs of effective engagement and some signs of ineffective engagement, you'll see listed here. So having a high rate of attendance, being forthright with information, following through with interventions. Some signs of ineffective would be difficulty scheduling appointments, missing appointments, things like that. Next. Trying to get through this, I know, guys. So our target population are youth between the ages of 17 and 21. They have a long stay in care. Youth who are at risk of aging out of care. Youth who may not achieve permanency despite best efforts. Difficulty with figuring out or carrying out a successful educational or vocational pathway, which we can help them with. Or youth who are able to live relatively independent but need support and guidance. So any of the youth that fall within these categories are eligible for the program. Next. So emerging adults with certain criteria may not be eligible for the program. So if a youth has gang involvement resulting in violent criminal behavior and or no desire to disengage from gang activity, that puts staff at a risk. Acute untreated psychosis or significant mental health impairment, acute drug addiction requiring a higher level of care, active suicidal and homicidal ideation within the last 30 days, intellectual disabilities that prevent them from completing individual living goals, and not willing to commit to weekly sessions. Next, please. Next, yep. Sessions should occur at least once a week, as stated. They typically last about an hour, and are purposefully used to process, practice, role play, and build real life skills. Next. So quick success story that I will share. I had a youth who was autistic. He was transitioning out of his foster parents' home because they were downsizing. So he had to get his own apartment. So imagine all his anxieties that he had, like just thinking about the process. So I was able to help him to transition to his own apartment right in time of the sale of the house. Sorry. And he was able to obtain his own apartment. He learned independent living skills. I helped him to set up utilities. We went shopping for his apartment. He had qualms about cooking. I helped him learn how to cook and utilize things in his apartment. I helped him to re-enroll into college, helped him around anxieties for employment, just a lot of different things. So he's actually still in his apartment. He's able to sustain himself. So that's one of my success stories. But if anybody has any referrals, please feel free to send them in to your supervisors or gatekeepers. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Joanne. I know I can speak from personal experience. I'd put you up on a pedestal. And I think even just a youth having someone like you attend meetings with them, with DCF or with whoever, I mean, it's just so helpful for them to feel supported in that way. And it's a different role than their DCF worker has, who may also be a wonderful advocate, but this is someone who meets with them like yourself so intensively and doing the nitty gritty work. I just can't say enough about, anybody working with youth to ask for Joanne or her equivalent. Kate, I don't even know what the proper term to ask for. Maybe Latosha, a case manager, or is it just a TSEA specialist?
It's a TSEA specialist. And so I just wanted to just highlight, Joanne, thank you for sharing the program. This program started, interestingly enough, I oversee the program lead that oversees this particular contract. And it started in CT about late 2019, and then the pandemic happened. So I want to commend, the efforts that, CHR and Wheeler, which are the two contracted providers in Connecticut that are offering the service provision, because they had to pivot and be very creative in working with young people. I also will just say on the slide, I think I put it in the chat too, if you're familiar with the DCF regions, it's actually, we expanded the region to 2, 3, 4, and 6. So those are the regions, and the offices in those regions have access to them, and there are gatekeepers there. But if you have a question or or want to discuss, what do you call it? The application or the referral, or is my person, eligible, you can contact the program lead, which is Daniel Ross. And we are being very flexible about, I know Joanne, she was supposed to say what, like some of the mights, if you notice the language, I know you attorneys are very clear on the language that might exclude someone, but that we have to be very careful. This is a model, and it's got a model fidelity, and so we try to keep it as close to the fidelity of the model as possible, with flexibility of so we are looking as an agency to expand to different other areas, but we wanted to be very strategic about how we did that because of the fidelity of the model.
I know we have to wrap up. I just see a quick question. So the regions that are excluded are 1 and 5, which
Yes.
areas are
so,
those?
So we have New Haven, Norwich, Middletown, Willimantic, Hartford, Manchester, New Britain, Meriden.
So those are all covered within 2, 3, 4,
those are all the if you have a question about what the regions are there, it's also on our website, like who's in region 1, 2 through 6. We have 6 regions and 11 offices.
And the other Stacy put a link there, so thank you.
But Latosha and Joe, can I just, one thing that we have the program in Philadelphia and Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, and even though, you mentioned the eligibility criteria, my experience has been that what is really unique about this program is that it's like a philosophy and approach that they go to great extents to screen youth in and not screen them out. And a lot of programs we all work with, just for whatever reason, like the youth with the most challenges often are the ones who don't get the needed service. And I know there's some limitations, but I've only seen the program make huge efforts to figure out how they can serve a young person. And like you said, Joanne, on one of the slides, like if you're having trouble engaging a young person, they brainstorm like what else can they do, rather than saying, okay, well, bye to the young person. It's like a problem we have to solve. And that's been really helpful to me, of like thinking through, like, if I'm having trouble engaging a youth, or we're looking at a program that's having trouble, like, how do we change that, rather than say, like, what's wrong with the youth? Like, it's a challenge for us. And I've just really learned so much from that program model.
I see a question about who makes the referral to TSEA. It's the DCF worker that makes the referral, but as any sort of service provider or attorney working with youth, it may be on you to kind of tap on them and say, oh, I know about this TSEA service. Can you please make that referral? You know, sometimes you'll get a response, there's a wait list, but just, you know, keep pushing on them. And
currently there is no wait list.
Yeah. So that's the piece of it to know, which is good information, because if you do get that response, it's good to say, oh, maybe this program has no wait list. So, and anytime I've asked, it's happened and it's been a game changer. So, definitely.
Alicia, yes, the foster parent can ask anybody can ask the DCF worker with respect to the referral. I think Stacy was just saying, you know, sometimes, you know, we ebb and flow when it comes in. That's just service provision in general, but that you know, you may refer and it might be that there is a you know, list, but that the gatekeepers will be able to let the worker know when they're making the referral, like, you know, okay, we can get an immediate slot or that this person is transitioning and we can get them in November or, you know, at that point. But yeah, anyone can nudge the worker, as Stacy was highlighting, to say, hey, I heard about this program. Can you make a referral? And again, 17 to 21, and that the young people that are in foster care.
I just want to add one thing. My experience has been that the specialists that end up matched up with the youth, but I mean, my experience has been they've been great connections. The youth is so happy to have, you know, to be able to work with them. So
yeah, I was going to say that, you know, it's transcend. Like, we have heard a lot of positive feedback from our we're just trying to get the young people to actually give it themselves so that they can be the orators of because they're the best sellers, right? Like, you know, and again, you know, as we say with services, and you all know, like, you know, good publicity and good PR ends up like now that program becomes popular, right? And that the kids, you know, they enjoy it, they like it, and so they can share with their youth counterparts to say, I'm in this program, y'all need to get up on it. And so we want that versus you know, having a you know, a strong proponent of youth villages who is, you know, tremendously involved to not, you know, not to have slots filled. This is a contract and we like to keep the slots filled.
Does it extend to youth who are in college out of state, or is it once they leave? Yeah.
So they have to be able to make the weekly visits. So again, that speaks to the model fidelity. And so again, yeah, I would any questions, feel free to reach out to. And if the worker isn't, again, because our workers are not as versed in every service provision that we have, but that again, the program lead for the transitional supports and the transition supports of emerging adults is Daniel Ross. And so he's in my division. And so he can help you navigate, like, is this something, you know, I have a, you know, example, and he can, you know, riffle that off and follow up. We also keep very good, as you know, she shared with you, we meet bi-weekly with both programs to talk about the service.
Thank you all so much for sharing your knowledge. I mean, just in closing, I guess what I would say is a big takeaway is for anybody listening is to just ask. Now that you're aware of, you know, that there's great federal coverage out there, that DCF has these new vital philosophies that are, you know, are really wonderful, you know, to demonstrate theoretically, you know, how they want to be working with this age group, and knowing that the on-the-ground workers are there, and just being able to find your voice as an advocate and say, hey, you know, I think there's something more you can be doing for this youth. I may not know exactly what it is, but maybe can you talk to your supervisor about it? Can you give Latosha a call and see what she knows? But just, you know, being able to ask and having the knowledge to just keep pushing, because that's usually, you know, from my experience, what the youth, you know, can really help from is just another voice in their corner speaking up. So anyway, thank you all so much for attending, and especially for our speakers sharing your knowledge. If anybody does have additional individual questions, feel free to email me and I can pass them along or share them with the group. Trying to think what else. We'll send around the policies after this presentation as well. as well as the slideshow. So thank you all again. Very much appreciated. Enjoy the afternoon.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.